Hey guys, so I recently received an email with a really great question, and I thought that it would make for a good video too. And let me show you guys what I mean, deciding to kind of set this up. I'm going to paraphrase the question that was asked and use some art from a previous issue that I've worked on. This was drawn by Sealor for Hack/Resurrection. But the question was basically that, this person had no issue with adding shadows to an image and adding highlights to an image, but they said they had no problem when the light was in the front and the shadows were minimal. Like in this case, the shadows are kind of all on the left side. They don't really cover much of the subject's face. But in this particular case, the light is behind the subject, and so you get most of the subject being in shadow, and you've got a few highlights thrown on there. But what about the rest of this? It's all in shadow and it's all flat, and that's fine. That can be a stylistic choice. I'm not trying to dictate what style to use, but what if you want to do more here? Okay, it's a big flat area. You want to make it more interesting. You want to make it more dramatic. What do you do in the shadows? Well, it turns out there is light in the shadows, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Alright, welcome everyone. My name is Kurt. I'm a comic book colorist, and this channel is dedicated to just making you better at digital color and making it less intimidating, which we know it can be. And so let's look at this example here again. We'll go over some terminology here first so we're all on the same page. Primary light source, that's your brightest light in the scene, okay? Or a key light, you might call it if you're a photographer. But in this scene, the light is the sun, it's behind him, it's very bright, and it's the primary and really the only light source that we're seeing in this image right now. But because it's behind him, we also have a big flat area basically with no additional light because the sun's not reaching it. What do I do here? I don't really know how to handle this part of the image. I get the highlights, that kind of makes sense. But once I get to the shadows, it gets confusing. And it was for me for a long time too. So I wanted to make this video to hopefully demystify this whole process. And let's first start by looking at some real world examples so we're all on the same page, and then we'll come back and we'll actually add some lights to this guy here. Now, you guys that watch my channel know how much I love Guardians of the Galaxy. It's gorgeous with color, and I found some good examples for us today. Now, on the image on the left with sad Groot here, we've got a primary light source, coming from the left and a little bit to the front because we've got some light on his face here. But on the opposite side, it's pretty dark. If we get really, really close and look at this, you can see there's a little bit of like a rim light there, but it's very, very dim and really not much in the way of any kind of secondary light sources. Now in this example, and I had to add this because this was just too sad. We had to make him happy. So in this example, still kind of a warm light coming from the left at almost the same angle, but you'll notice that there's a lot more blue in the shadows this time. And this blue is something that I think the photography world would call a fill light, because we don't have a lot of detail in the shadows, but we don't want it to be flat. We want to do something with it. And so by adding a second light source, or in this case, we just got some glowing going on behind him, then we've got a way to see that detail better. It just looks more dramatic, it looks more interesting. You can see it even on the sides of these objects here, these little buttons that are sticking up. So the shadow areas on this image are filled with a blue light, okay? And I want you to notice that there's not really any of that bluish light on the front, okay? The primary light source is brighter, and it kind of overpowers that blue, okay? It's not going to show up in those areas. In this shot of Star-Lord, it's almost kind of the same setup we have here. We've got a really bright white light or warm light coming from the left, and it's really just catching, his hair and his skin on this side. You can see where his collar is blocking it down here. But think about how dark his face would be if it wasn't for this blue light that's coming in from the right side. Because you can see how dark it is with his eyes and cheek in this area where neither light source is hitting it very much. You wouldn't be able to make out any detail. And so the principle is the same thing when we talk about something in comics. You want to add more detail to an area and not just have a flat, shadow color like this, if you're working in a style that you do things in the shadows. This one's a little bit harder to see just looking at the image. But before I make these contrast adjustments, I want you to notice this area right here. Okay, I'm kind of outlining it now. But I'm kind of tracing the edge of that shadow and that bright light. And then we could take it out of this area. So that part of his face is the primary light source. Now, he is standing next to a white wall. So I think what's happening here, they may have used a reflector or something, but I think this is just reflecting off of the white wall, And that's where we're getting these lights on this side. Again, kind of hard to see, so if you crank the saturation or crank the contrast way up, it really becomes a lot clearer. Now this is blown out and looks terrible, but that's not the point. I want you guys to notice that the shape that's being created here, that is the primary light source in this image, it's not spilling onto this side because it's blocked by his face. This light's pretty strongly coming from the right. But notice that this side is a completely different color, okay? Because it's reflecting off the wall, it's absorbing some of the wall and bouncing back, and it's a different color. It's not quite as intense. If I go back to the original, now you guys can see what I mean. Obviously, it's brighter on the right than it is on the left. One more quick example, and then we'll jump into actually how to apply this. Now again, I'm going to crank the saturation and the contrast on this up just so you guys can see it a little bit better. I just did this with a curves adjustment. But I want you to notice something interesting here, because once this clicked with me, I felt like I immediately leveled up, you know? It doesn't happen often in the art world, I feel like, when you have those little moments of like things just line up. So I want you to notice this. Now the primary light here is this big orange yellowy light that we get on the left side. And you can see where it's falling on his face. And you can see the shadow area where it's not. Okay, that light, that orange light is not reaching this area of his face that is looking blue right now. If you desaturate the blue, it's a little bit easier to see. But you'll notice that there's not really any blue in the orange area, and there's not any orange in the blue area, okay? These are really completely separate, and there's very little overlap, if any. Now what's happening here is this orange light is so bright on this image, it's brighter than the blue reflected light, or the secondary light source. So the secondary light source is only contained within the shadows from the primary light source. Now I've looked at a lot of comics, a lot of movies, but I've been trying to kind of poke holes in this way of thinking about it because I haven't really heard it put quite this way. But that shadow that's created from our primary light source acts as a container for all the secondary light sources. And I say everything secondary because if it's not primary, it's secondary. You know, whether this is coming from the sky or reflection off of something, if it's dimmer than the primary light source, then it's only going to come into the areas of shadow. This is really clear, like even on his skin, you can see where, like here's an orange little area here and here and here, but even in between these two, you can see that blue through there. You can see the blue here and here and everywhere else, but it's not showing up in the areas where the primary light source is. And I found a few examples in comics too. I thought I would show you guys just so you can see it in a printed page. So like this, I believe, I'm pretty sure this was Edgar Delgado colors on Humberto Ramos art. And you'll notice that, like for example, you see how the red in this hand on this side, that darkest red, you know, it's facing down, it's facing away from the sky. But look at his left hand. His left hand's facing up. So we've got that dark red rim here, but inside that red shadow, we've got this kind of whitish blue from the sky. You can also see it a bit in the shadow on his face, that little bit of white on top of that deep red there. Same team here. I'm a big fan of these guys, but you can see we've got this really hot yellow, orangey, bright light that's kind of, rim lighting all of Spider-Man. But then within that darkest part, you've got a completely separate light source, this light blue color, that only appears in the shadows. You can also see that down here at the bottom. We've got this kind of tealish, dark base color, the orange light on top. And then in the shadows, again, only contained to the shadows, we've got the reflected light. And this is one of the best examples that I found, and I don't know who colored this. Joe Mad drew it. I apologize to whoever colored this. You did an amazing job, but I couldn't find who did it. So if we just focus on the red on Spider-Man's costume, we've got a primary light source, lighting these big bright areas. Now watch what happens if I just block all of these. Let's say that for our purposes for coloring this, if we were going to color this, we don't think about the primary light source anymore. Just black it out completely. You can see that the remaining part of this red image, and I haven't done a perfect job, you can see it's being treated with this separate kind of greenish, yellowy, gray light, because that's what color the sky is in this case. So I found that's the best way to think about this, at least for me, and how like I said, how the mental math works for me, is to get in your primary light source first and then treat the shadows separately. Because, I mean, by definition, the primary light source isn't reaching the shadows. So I've got my primary light source. I've already got my highlights in here. I've got my shadow, was basically what's left over in this case. If you want to know where the highlights go, I will link my Where Do Highlights Go videos in the description. And we know the primary light source isn't reaching the shadows. So what is? That's the next question. What's the next light source? If it's not the sun, what is it being lit by? Now in this case, it's the sky, okay? So if I black everything else out, okay, now we're just going to focus on the shadow areas. And I want to think about this just as if I would anything else that I was adding lights to. We're still adding highlights, we're just limiting them to the shadows. Now, because this, in my case, because this is, obviously it's a dimmer light, it's not quite as bright, it's not going to be as much contrast because it's not the sun. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a feather on my lasso so that it's got a little bit of fuzziness along the edge. And we're going to fill in, his forehead is going to be lit. Again, we're just thinking about this like any other light source, okay? Top of his nose, maybe, and his cheeks. It's going to kind of come down like this, sort of. But it's going to be something like this. Now, I want this edge here to be a hard edge, so I'm using the 0 pixel lasso for that. And let's go get a blue color here. And this is just normal mode. And let me go on the right layer. Something like that. Now, skin's pretty reflective, so I might want to add a little bit more up here at the top. Make a little highlight here, maybe. Definitely the tip of the nose. And now when we turn off this black layer, we've got a more interesting situation than we did when the image started. Okay, before that was just all flat, and now we've got some light there. So the point is, I'm treating these shadows with completely different lighting, different colors, different directions of it, because they are entirely different. Let's say that maybe he was sitting 10 feet away from a campfire. Well, the campfire might be brighter than the sky. It just depends on how far away it is and all that stuff. But if I go in and say, select some of these areas underneath, the light's coming from below, then the bottom of his nose is going to be lit this time instead of the top, and maybe the underside of his cheeks instead of the top side. And I'm doing this really quickly just to kind of prove a point here. And go grab a shadow color, or go grab my lighting color, say it's just an orangey color, and fill that in. Certain styles are going to work better on certain types of line art, but I hope this gets you guys thinking about this in a way that is easily repeatable and should make your art look better. I was going to wrap this video up there, but I was looking at the video and I just realized that even in this webcam shot, you can see these principles kind of at work. Now, I have a very bright, pretty warm light, kind of right here at this angle. That's what you guys are seeing here. And you can see that these shadows over here where that light's not reaching are pretty blue, okay? Especially along this edge. It's pretty much in the same hue range as in the background. Behind me, there's a little blue light that's lighting up the back of the room. And you can see the opposite effect happening. This is so hard to do in reverse. So like on the wall here, the light's very blue, but look at the shadows. The shadows are taking on that kind of warm, orangey effect here. It really kind of sells that point pretty well. And you might be thinking, well, why are those shadows warm and why is this shadow cool? Again, and it kind of goes along with what we were saying earlier, it depends on which source is brighter. Now, as I'm sitting here, this light is much brighter than the blue light that's behind me. There's none of that blue light really hitting directly me anywhere. Even this blue that you're seeing here is all reflected light from the room. But in the back of the room, it's closer to the blue light. So the blue light is the strongest, and then you've got the little orangey, brownish areas in the shadows. Because in the back of the room, the blue light is stronger than the orange one. Does this make sense? I realize this is kind of a technical video, but thank you guys so much for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe. I will put some videos around here that I think you might enjoy that are related to this. And video's long enough. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.